hate hearing yourself talk. I do. All right. Hopefully everyone's getting here safely. Been an interesting few days, right? I appreciate those that have been asking about William. As of today, I'm calling him Mr. Cool. I've never seen a newborn react to the singing of Dean Martin like that child does. So that's how he gets that name. But it was quite an experience taking a newborn to the emergency room and then getting diagnosed with a cold. Something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But I appreciate Jeanette, especially that suit was terrific. And Jeanette walked in on a fun situation yesterday. Here we were, the young, inexperienced parents that we are, thought we're going to get really ahead of this weather. So I sent, Emily also agreed to it, to go down to Alabama. And so they were out of the storms, out of the way, and I was by myself. I was living the bachelor life again for a few days because I think we all know how much work actually gets done if we have to work remotely. And then yesterday morning happened, and it started raining in my kitchen. And now we've got a massive hole in there. We think we've got it fixed. But speaking of enviable situations, we'll get to tonight's topic about envy. But I did want to say thank you for those that have asked about William. He's doing just fine, and I appreciate it. We're going to continue tonight with our Living Love series, and tonight we're going to focus on love not being envious. All right, good. We're good to go on the clicker too. Before we do that, let's kind of do a brief overview of what we've been looking at. I'm not going to go through one by one, but I did want to take this time to kind of recall or think about really why we're going over this. And we start with Paul. Paul's the one who wrote this, and Paul in this case is addressing a new church. They're having some trouble. And to summarize it, paraphrase it, I guess, they're needing a lesson in how to love each other as a church. And it never amazes me how well Paul is able to put his ideas on paper, because not only does he give us an example, a biblical definition of what love is, such a good example that I don't recall a wedding that I've been to that hasn't used this, passage in it. But not only does he do that, he also takes certain negative emotions or actions, and he reminds us just how faulty we are at times and how dangerous that is in learning how to love. And we can't forget that love, the word itself, is an action, and it's a learned action. We have to learn how to do that. And Paul does a wonderful job by taking the time to break down what things we should not do first and then things that we should do in order to give us a better understanding of what Christian love looks like. So tonight, we're going to focus on love is not envious. Now, Jacob if you didn't know this, Jacob is the one that originally came up with these ideas. Jacob addresses just kind of the silliness or the simplicity of that statement, and I'll get to that in a little bit later. But we really need to think about, and our goal tonight is to really break this word down. It's easy to just look at that and say, hey, don't do that. Just a simple example, Olivia, she's learning how to be a big sister, and some of those lessons are quite fun to teach. But showing apathy, it would be hard. She's the only grandchild on either side until now. She's gotten all the attention until now. So it's very possible that there could be feelings of jealousy in a 3-year-old. And it's easy to see that and say, Livy, don't do that. However, I think we will benefit by looking at just how ingrained being envious or being jealous is in our nature. And just to point to that, somebody tell me how many of the 10 Commandments address envy out of 10? If you didn't hear me say 10 before, I said it again. Do we know? 2. 2 of them do. It's the only one that's a repeat. Okay? Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's things. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Okay? So 2 of them address envy. What really, if you think about it and boil it down, going all the way back to the beginning, what really led to the downfall of man? Why did Eve do the one thing she was told not to do? What was it she wanted? That's a question. You can answer it. Anybody? She was told not to eat the fruit, okay, of the tree of good and evil. Really, the way it was explained to her was, hey, look, you don't have this. You eat this, you can have it. So envy, jealousy, is really at the foundation of what Adam and Eve both did in the very beginning. Keep going in the New Testament. There's a dozen examples we could use. We think of the Pharisees, the Jewish elite. You think jealousy was a part of their motivation? Here's a guy who looks very humble, is how it's often described in the Bible, and Jesus, his apostles, who's teaching a better way of doing things and a better way of getting what they all wanted. Naturally, that's going to draw attention, and it did. I think it's very possible that those Pharisees, those Jewish elite, envied those apostles and Jesus in that situation. And really, we've got it going against us in this world today. And I'll touch on that more when I get to it. But it's so bad, and this is my opinion, it's so bad that I think a big portion of what comes out of our wallet is driven by, I don't have that, I want that. And if you really get, and not that I've studied it really, but what little I know about advertising, that's really what that science is all about. Making you want what you don't have so that you'll spend your money on it. So I say that to really kind of hopefully just catch your attention on just how dangerous this is. And while it sounds simple of don't be jealous, we really need to stop and think about what that word really means. So my goal is to, one, first get a working definition so that we can all be on the same page when we're talking about envy, jealousy. And then from there, I want to talk about 3 areas where we can see it. Okay? And some of those, we can spend a little time discussing that if we need to. That's totally fine, because we really need to think about where we could see envy pop up and cause us problems. After that, I want to look at 3, I'm calling it dangers associated with being envious. And then, lastly, 3 ways that we can kind of fight against this need to be envious. So let's start. This is the definition we've been given on enviousness. It says, envy is a feeling of discontented or resentful longing aroused by someone else's property, ability, or opportunity. Now, I'll give credit to Jacob because he did the work on this. If you look at the history of the word jealousy, it stems from the Greek word zelo. I did not study Greek, I studied Latin, because if I had to take a second language, you might as well take a dead one, because no one knows if you're right or wrong. But but I know that Jacob did, so we can trust what he said there. From that, we get the word zealousness or zealous. Now, I think, would you agree with me? If you hear the word zealous, typically that has a positive connotation to it. We want to be zealous. Zealousness, I think you could define as being passionate about something so much that you work for it, that you go get it. I don't think anybody would disagree with that being a good thing. However, eventually what we also get from that word's delineation is jealous. Okay? Jealous. And we've got this one, but if we need to pare that down a little bit more is, Greg, you've got something I want. I don't like that you have it, and I don't. Okay? It could be as simple as that. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. And really, I want to really talk about this for a minute. 3 places where we see envy. Okay? Now this says all 3. We're going to work from the inside out, like Tiger Woods in his golf game. Okay? Tim, I thought you would get that one, so thank you for laughing at that. Let's start in the home. Really kind of a scary thought, if you think about it. Home should be where you see the most amount of teamwork. Sorry, I'm a guy. I'm going to use guy metaphors. See the most amount of teamwork, working together. Really, envy, jealousy should not be present. However, oh, how wrong we can be. A very common example, and one that Jacob addressed when he preached this the first time. Typically the work balance, I'm not going to say which side or the other, but typically one spouse will work more than the other. Okay? From my standpoint, my wife works 3 days a week. She works very hard those 3 days a week. She's watching, so I have to make sure I'm careful what I say. No, she does. She works really hard. She does a very good job. But we agreed on that because we both wanted her to be in the home as much as she can. Okay? It would be very easy for me, just while I'm dreading going to a courtroom, never your courtroom, Judge Sockwell, never. I'm serious, she does a good job. But it would be very easy for me at times to think, why can't I be home 3 days a week? I change diapers. I can do that. I can play with Livy. I can do all of those things. I'd rather be doing that. Okay? You could flip that. I think within the first hour of waking up, Olivia had changed costumes 4 times. She had gone from being Elsa, probably to Anna, Moana, pretty much any Disney princess you can think of. And she's run all over the place, being her normal, happy self. But any of you that have had a young child can relate to that. That's exhausting. It's very exhausting. It would be very easy for Emily in her position to think, it frustrates me so much that Brent gets to get in his nice truck, he gets to cruise on up to Columbia, Pulaski, wherever he's driving to, play a little Billy Joel, sip on a little coffee, and just have a nice little peaceful moment while I've got to deal with this. Okay? That's jealousy. That's how that starts. Now that's an easy example. There are worse. I'll just ask this question. Can parents be jealous of their children? Absolutely. Okay? Now I have a whole world of lessons to learn in that regard, so I'm not going to profess to know everything. But I have seen examples, a very specific example that I won't go into too many details, of a parent who was so envious of their child that not only did they, in an unhealthy way, insert themselves into their personal lives, they did it by creating fake social media accounts, creating unnecessary drama for their own child. It became so bad in this instance that this child nearly harmed themselves. Okay? And all of that stemmed from one parent's jealousy. Now, that's an extreme example, but I think of a more common example. Our children being able to do things that we didn't do. Okay? I'm sure many of us have memories of things that we wish we could have done. And we are going to have to draw the line at some point of whether or not wishing my child will do that becomes being envious of my child. And I've just now started thinking about that. Livy's going to be a tall girl. She's going to be very strong. I played a lot of basketball. I'm probably going to want her to play. What if she doesn't want to? Okay? I think that's a very common way of doing that. What about children, though? Being envious of y'all, their parents. What do you think is probably the most common word that a child is told, especially if they're middle school and older? One word. Take a guess. Say it louder. No. You're absolutely right. How fun was that when you were their age? Hearing the word no. Now, our parents were right. They were supposed to say that. We're right. We're supposed to say that. But was there ever a point where you were hearing no, where you had this thought of, man, I am so sick of being told no. I am so sick of being unable to make my own decisions. That's jealousy. That's in the home. Okay? Let's move on. The church. Jacob gave several examples. I want to focus on two, because I'm not a preacher. He talks about preachers. I'm not a preacher. Two that I think are the most common. Envying one's ability with how they're able to serve the church. Okay? Seeing someone do something in a manner that I wish I could do that, therefore I envy that person. Okay? And I'm not, again, any examples that I get, I'm not trying to sound this way. I've been told that I'm very calm in talking in front of a group of people. At least I pretend to be. Well, that's been learned. I remember as a child being told that I was coming up to a situation like this, and I wanted to say no, but I couldn't say no. And so when I had to go up there, you could probably see the paper shaking. Okay? That's a learned thing. But how quick does that evolve into feelings of jealousy? Of, why can't I do that? Why can't I do that? Here's one that kind of hits me. This is the other one. When we suffer, when we go through something, how easy is it to have that seed of jealousy planted? Now, I think this is not breaking news. If we are going to follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, I think we all know we're going to suffer. And according to James and Paul and many others, we're supposed to be happy about it. I'm being sarcastic. But it's Paul, I think, describes it almost like a reward for what you're doing. However, while we all are guaranteed that, are we going to suffer the same way? No. Because one of the great things about the church is our diversity, our difference of minds, our difference of opinions. Also our differences in our abilities. And what that also brings into play is the other fact about suffering is that God, it says it, we don't have to question it, God is not going to allow us to suffer further than what we are capable of handling. But, what happens when you're in the thick of it? Okay? You're going through something really hard. How easy is it to point to that person and ask, why don't they have to deal with this? That's envy. That's in the church, and that's something that I think happens a lot more than is talked about. I've had to talk to myself about it. It's very dangerous. What about the world? This one, like I said, we've got it working against us. Even so much as the things that we wear. I'm wearing a watch. I got this watch. One, I'm what they call a watch guy. Okay, I like watches. It started from my grandfather, William, who he always had this pocket watch that was hanging up in this display case, and that was supposed to go to his son, also named William, when he passed, and it did. And then as I grew older, three little words changed my perception on watches. Bond, James Bond. And ever since then, I've just really liked it. But I just putting myself, in the shoes of, I need to learn from this. I can tell you the movie that this brand of watch was used in a James Bond movie. Okay? Live and Let Die, Roger Moore. It's a very good one. But even things like that, it's become so much worse now. Those of you that have kids with cell phones and social media accounts, good luck. I'm still trying to figure out how we're going to handle that one. But social media has just created this environment to where it not only sets the standard, it makes people feel bad if they don't envy what they're doing and live up to that. And that's nothing new. When I grew up, I always liked watching old movies. My first one was Cary Grant. Christy, I thought you'd appreciate that. We've talked several times about Cary Grant. And I did. I loved watching him. I remembered, I loved that he was able to dress so cool and be so cool. But it's an interesting quote from Cary Grant. Just kind of shows how shallow that idea is. The quote is, everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant. Cary Grant's the one that said that. Okay? And we'll talk more about that as we go on. But those are the three places that we need to really think about how envy is present. And we have to be careful with it. So much so that we need to look at some of the dangers with it. Okay? I like how Jacob discussed this. Envy is a dumb sin. It is. And that kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning of it's very simple to see jealousy in action by someone else and say, don't do that. Whether it's a kid, somebody else, it's very easy to see that, point out that that's wrong, and move on. But it's also, it's such a small, well, all sin is equal, so I need to be careful how I word that. It's such a little thing, a little switch that's flipped in your head, that I think it makes it more dangerous because it makes it more common. We have a good verse here. A tranquil heart gives to the flesh, but envy makes the bones rot. I love the metaphor here. Okay? I love acknowledging that if we're at peace within our heart, okay, we don't have to worry about things like envy. However, if envy gets into our hearts It is like a sickness. It is like a disease. It will spread. It causes the bones to rot. And it starts small. It starts very, very small. But it grows rapidly. That leads to the second one. Excuse me. Envy is a very despicable, I would say dangerous, if I haven't said that already, dangerous sin. Great verse. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Really kind of drives the point home here about just how they wouldn't keep saying the same thing, or just as simply as I can put it, they wouldn't keep saying and warning us the same about the same thing over and over and over again if it wasn't dangerous. Okay? But if it does reach that point of just that starting point and it grows, it really gets dangerous because it starts to show itself outwardly. So you've moved from struggling, possibly even sinning on the inside, now it's moved outward to where you get to a point, and I've done this too, I won't say to whom, no one in this room, no one that's watching, I don't think, but I've done this too. We envy, don't say names or anything like that. Think of somebody that we've envied before. Okay? Then something bad happens to them. They get what I'm going to call the Seinfeld response. Oh, that's a shame. Okay? Those of you that have seen that know what I'm talking about. Did you hear how shallow my response was in saying, oh, that's a shame. That's a real shame. I look very concerned, don't I? I sound even more concerned. Okay? How often do we do that? Really what that means is I'm expressing outwardly that I wish that person bad tidings. Okay? That's what that really means. And it could be any number of ways. Oh, man, they look like they've gained some weight. Man, it's a shame. Did you see what they were wearing? Did you hear about what they're going through? It's a shame. I mean, at that point, we've really got to stop and think about what we're doing. Because it's already rooted, okay? This little idea of envy has rooted, and now it's being acted upon, okay? And I can't, I mean, you're doing, by doing that, you're being the exact opposite of what God is calling us to be. Never will you see an example of Jesus, the example that we have, of doing anything close to that. In fact, the best example that we have is on the cross. He has literally been spat at, cut, bleeding, just unthinkable things, being yelled at, terrible things, mocked. And in that moment, we know what he could have done. We sing about what he could have done. What did he do, though? God, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There's no jealousy in that tone. It would be very easy to be jealous of the people that aren't having to go through what he was going through. But in that moment, he chose to be exactly who he was, Jesus Christ, and gave us an example of what we should do. Now the third danger. Envy is an extremely dangerous sin. It grows. Jacob gave a great metaphor when he preached this the first time. He called it a gateway sin. Okay? I agree with that. In fact, if you recall the overview of all of these lessons, I would guarantee you, if you are guilty of doing any of the things that we're told not to do, There probably was a time where envy might have been the start of that. One thing that struck me, I like metaphors, I like figurative language. Envy to me is the key that opens the door to things like resentment. Okay? And I'm not going to speak on resentment too much because that's one of the lessons and I don't want to get into that. But, excuse me. Let's think about some biblical examples of just how dangerous this is. Not just to us, but to others as well. What happened to Joseph? He was eradicated from their universe, his brothers, his family's universe, all because of what? They were jealous. Okay? They were jealous. About Saul. Saul's killed his thousands. David's what? 10,000s. What did Saul do in response to that? He not only tried to kill David, he destroyed his whole family. If he comes down to it. All because Saul wanted what David had. Okay? Cain and Abel. Something, it's not simple, it's important. It's how they worshipped in that time. But something as simple as a difference in effort led to the death of a brother by the other brother's hand. We could go on and on. I mean, well, even Paul himself called himself the chief of sinners. He outlines for us how he helped orchestrate the death of another apostle. And I dare say there might have been a touch of jealousy in there. Okay? Who knows? That might have been the starting point. I don't like that what you're saying is getting more attention than what I'm hearing over here. Okay? So not only is it dangerous to us, it's dangerous to others as well. And sometimes, as we've seen just in the biblical examples, it's not just an outward expression of wishing bad things on someone else. It can cause bad actions against other people. Paul talks about filing suits against people, which is ironic for me to talk about, considering that I'm a lawyer. But I don't know that I disagree with him. He basically talks about how it's better to just let it go. Because if you've ever been involved in a lawsuit, it's not fun. And basically you have to prepare any and every bad thing against your opponent, humanly possible, in order to get what you're asking for. Okay? Now, I'm not going to say that it's something like that starts with jealousy, but you have some of the same characteristics that you see. And you would be shocked at how it can bring out the worst in people. Sometimes it's very entertaining. It's very entertaining, but it's also very sad. So, now, let's see. I have a verse here to look at. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but it is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. That's about as cut and dry as you can get about how dangerous it is. Words that we notice: unspiritual, demonic, selfish, disorder, vile. Okay? How dangerous those words are. How dangerous that idea of being envious is, not only to ourselves, what goes on in our own hearts, but also how it affects our actions against others. So, how do we combat this? What can we do? First one, we can do. Train ourselves not to view others or another's benefit as your own deficit. That is easier said than done, okay? Because some people might argue that there's a fine line maybe between being zealous or jealous. Being zealous, I think we discussed, is not a bad thing. It's called having ambition, I think you would say. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. However, it depends on the motive, and it goes back to what's going on in your heart. Okay? Are you wishing something bad to happen all because of you not getting your way? And then one thing that I was thinking about to kind of better drive this point home is, think of that person that you're jealous of. It might help by getting to know them a little bit. You might come to some understandings about that person and learn a brother and sister in Christ, as we're commanded to do, in a better way. An example that I said I would come back to. I feel fairly comfortable in front of a group of people speaking. I've had to learn that. Some lessons have been very embarrassing. The best one that I can think of is when I met a football player by the name of Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning is like what other people equate to Michael Jordan or Tom Brady. That's mine. And when I was in college, by happenstance, I got to meet him. Oh boy, that's embarrassing. I was stubborn in the sense of I'm not going to not meet him, but I don't think when I went through puberty my voice cracked that much as when I was meeting him. And then I was stupid enough to go back and try and talk to him again. I'm sure I was a pest. He was very nice about it though. And I'm glad that happened, because definitely not that day, but much later, when I was thinking about it, I really kind of took a second to think about me in that instance and how I handled that. And it makes me laugh now, because I'm sitting here going, you were so nervous because this dude can throw a piece of leather through the air better than you can. When it boils down, it does it very, very well, okay? And you envied what he did and how he did it. And from then, I've been able to kind of, there's been other things too. I taught for 10 years. And I tell you, if you want to get humbled and learn how to speak in front of a large group of people, go teach middle school for a good 8 years. That's a group of people that will tell you exactly how they feel, when they feel it, and it doesn't really matter how they say it, because they're going to say it how they want to say it. And you've got to deal with it. There are too many examples to count. So it could be very easy to be jealous of one's ability like that, but if you took a second to kind of learn about it, it took time to get to that point. And in some cases, there could be a sad thing. We all have people that we look up to. Some are people that we're never going to meet. I mentioned Cary Grant. I'll stick with that one. That wasn't even his name. He didn't even get to choose his name. Gary Cooper chose his name. He didn't even mean to. Because Gary Cooper was a thing, they wanted somebody with the same initials. Everything about him was made up. And that's what makes that quote make sense. And so I think if we're really going to try and eradicate envy like this, we really have to start by training ourselves not to look at someone else's benefit as our deficit. And to do that, I think we have to just get to know them, which is hard, especially if you got that jealousy seed planted. But once that happens, I think this makes this next one easier. Praise the people you envy. That's easier said than done too. And I think that, quite frankly, we cannot nor will not truly commit to this if we can't do the first thing. Someone does a good job, tell them, hey, good job. Good job. As hard as that is, if they did a good job, they did a good job. We all have coworkers that frustrate us. I have one, just so happens to be my boss. No, I'm kidding. No. But she's a wonderful person, but sometimes she can do things that kind of annoy me. And she's very good at giving a lot of suggestions. And one of them yesterday, it really took a lot of effort by me. It's like, yeah, that's a good suggestion. I need to do that. How hard is that? But again, if it is hard, I think we need to take a second and stop and think where we're at. If we're having to work really hard to do that, maybe we need to go back and look at our own enviousness, or maybe we're being jealous of that person. But it gets easier over time, okay? It gets easier, one, the more you know that person, the more you take time to get to know that person, train yourself like it says, and then just commit yourself to doing it. And then lastly, jump into the life that God has for you, okay? I think we all can agree we can't do that if we've skipped steps 1 or 2. Okay? Because what are we really talking about? If we're going to jump into the life that God has for us, we're committing ourselves to becoming more Christ-like, to learning how to love someone else. Okay? And envy has no place in that picture. And if it is in that picture, we have to really stop and do some soul searching, look inwards, and see what we can do to get rid of it. I think we've got just a couple of minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments before they ring the second bell? I didn't do that good of a job. It's very important, and it was a very good reminder for me, especially just recognizing where we can see envy. It scared me a little, thinking about envy being in the home. How quickly have we been mad at our spouse and possibly envied something that they were able to do, and how quickly that has morphed into something much worse than that. And two, we have the extra responsibility, if you are a parent, of fostering the good environment of not having jealousy towards our own children and them not being envious of us at the same time. It really, it can be scary if you think about it. So I think it's one thing that we have to really guard ourselves against, or else, like, you know, it is that gateway sin, and it will just kind of eradicate any chances we have of learning how to love, like Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 13. All right. Thank you all for your attention. Definitely appreciate y'all being here, braving the elements. I hope y'all get home safely. Thank you.
right, good evening on this cold Wednesday night. Methinks that some of our children needed to get out. They're a little wild and feral tonight. Okay. Well, that's good. That's getting some of that energy out next door. But yes, if you're visiting with us tonight, we thank you for being here. And please stick around, give us a chance to get to know you a little better. You might be joining us online. It's a good possibility. We welcome you that way also. Pass along some prayer requests, a sympathy notice, and some reminders as usual. Laureen Chandler is scheduled to have aortic valve replacement surgery on Monday, February the 2nd at St. Thomas. I know for a fact she would really appreciate our prayers. Natalie Hayslip is scheduled for a follow-up appointment with her surgeon on Monday, February the 2nd, and she is scheduled to consult with an oncologist at a later date, is obviously hoping that they were able to get all of the cancer and that treatment will be minimal, so please be prayerful about that. Kathy Atwell is still scheduled to have her first radiation treatment tomorrow in Columbia and is hoping to get there safely. Gary Gandy, this is the brother of Mark Gandy, is still in St. Thomas Rutherford Hospital after recently suffering a stroke. He expects to transfer to a rehab facility once it can be arranged. And there a number of others you might find in last week's bulletin who continue to need your prayers. We want to extend Christian love and sympathy to the family of Charles Williams. Charles was the brother-in-law of Danny Cockrell, and the funeral was held today at Loretta Memorial Chapel. Here are some reminders. There will, in fact, be no bulletin this week. In addition to that, the main email account that we use to send updates is not currently functioning. And until that is fixed, we will be updating you using Facebook as well as a Gmail account, which is pulaskistreet@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, you might want to add that email address to your book, there online, so to speak. I think some people, in some cases, maybe these were ended up in some people's junk mail or whatever, but just be looking for updates at with the pulaskistreet@gmail.com. Unless you are notified otherwise prior to Sunday, we do plan to resume our usual schedule this Sunday, February the 1st. There will also be a wedding shower in honor of Elizabeth Sockwell, bride-elect of Barrett Wilson, this Sunday, February the 1st, beginning at 1 o'clock p.m. in the main foyer out front. The selections are at Miss Millie's, Amazon, Pottery Barn, and Williams-Sonoma. I think I said those right. Also, we will be meeting for feast this Sunday, February the 1st at 5:30 p.m. At last discussion, that's I think is going to remain in the fellowship building, right? Or the new building?
We might have chilled it. Don't they hold us back to the sound system?
Okay.
It's operational, we just need to tune it in.
Okay. So, all right, let me go ahead and say this. We're thinking we're going to do it over in the new building. The one possible hiccup is the audio, okay? So that's something maybe we'll have to try to make sure is up and running in place, figured out, all that kind of wonderful stuff before we get in there. And I'm going to have to get in there and try out PowerPoint or go without one. We'll see what we can do, okay? One other thing I've got here is there is a sign-up sheet in the foyer, the inner foyer, for dining out at Top of the River. This is for the senior ministry. This is February the 7th. I think that's Saturday, February the 7th. So there's a plan to go to Top of the River. If you'd like to be a part of that outing, go sign up there in the inner foyer. All right, I believe that's all that I have. All right, I want you to imagine that you live in London. I don't know if you've been to London. You've been to London. There's some really nice areas in London, and there's some really not nice areas in London. Well, I've been there. I remember I went to a Chinese buffet while I was there in the Chinatown part of London, and I'll just go ahead and tell you it was too authentic for me. I wanted mine to be a little more American, a little more American Chinese. This was not that. It was kind of scary. But I want you to imagine that you live in London and a mailman arrives and he hands you a large fancy envelope with a coat of arms containing 2 more envelopes. And you open the first one and it's from the Queen. And you have been personally invited to meet with her. You're in the middle of celebrating that when you open the other envelope. It's a list of requirements for seeing the Queen, and one is that even though you have an invitation, you have to wear a $10,000 suit from the best tailor in London. Now, if you're reading this, if you're hearing me and you're a woman, just substitute dress, right, for suit, okay? And just track that as we go through this. And you go, what? Right? That's your response to this $10,000 suit thing. I can't afford a $10,000 suit / dress. Where am I going to get $10,000 to buy this kind of clothing? And just when you're thinking that you're never going to get to see the Queen, you get a call. You don't know me, but I know you, and that you've been invited to see the Queen. I also know that you cannot afford a $10,000 suit, but I have one. It's never been worn that would fit you, and you can have it. So you turn up at Buckingham Palace wearing a $10,000 suit. And just as you're about to go in, you see another guy saying, but I have an invitation. And the attendant replies, I'm sorry. Even with an invitation, you can't see the Queen in that suit. Now, at this point, you could respond in one of 2 ways. You could think or say under your breath, you pathetic slob. Imagine trying to see the Queen dressed in that suit. But if you respond like that, haven't you forgotten something? You're actually wearing somebody else's suit yourself. Sure, it's yours now, but you didn't pay for it. So shouldn't you rather respond with compassion? Oh, that poor guy. What a pity that he didn't have a generous benefactor like I've got. In 2 Corinthians 5, in verse 21, the Apostle Paul writes, God made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in Jesus. It's stunning, isn't it? And the language is simple, but the concept's profound. These words sum up the heart of the gospel. You and I can stand in the presence of God only if we are clothed with the suit of righteousness that Jesus purchased. And while no one can afford this suit, and while no one can earn this clothing, as it were, We are called to exercise our faith in baptism, and in doing so, we are clothed with Christ. Galatians 3:26 through 27. Every one of us who gets to see the King, so to speak, should operate from a place of humility and a place of compassion towards others. Because we are being given something that we didn't deserve, and we're being given something that we couldn't earn in a million years. If you haven't done so already, why not allow Jesus to become your generous benefactor this evening? If we can help you in any way, pray with you, perhaps accommodate you in baptism, or at least enter into a more pointed discussion about what you must do in response to what Jesus did. If we can help you in any way, come now together we stand and sing.
Hear the sweet voice of Jesus say, "Come to me, I am the way." Hearken the loving call, obey. Come, for he loves you so. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and died. He's the same loving Savior yet, Jesus the crucified, casting your heavy burden down. Come to the cross, the world may frown, yet we shall wear a glorious crown when he makes up his own. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and died. He's the same loving Savior yet, Jesus the crucified. Open for you the pearly gate, loved ones for you. Now watch and wait. Terrible thought to cry too late. Jesus, I come to thee. Only a step, only a step. Come, for he bled for you and died. He's the same loving Savior yet, Jesus the crucified. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, we love you. We're thankful for the fact that you have given us the ability to be seen as Jesus through your eyes. We pray that you would help us to remain connected to him so that we can be the righteousness that you desire because of him. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.